Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that might not know me, my name's Amy Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. And this is something that I don't think I've done before, but I keep forgetting to acknowledge that Yao Owusu-Darko, our Senior Project Specialist, is here with us today. And Yao administers our federal grant program as well as our CLCC program. So if questions arise in that regard, Yao is here to help answer them. And I also see that Victoria Jaskaran, who is our brand new Sandy Breslin Fellow, is here as well today to start learning all about this stuff. So this is the fourth out of 5 lunch and learn sessions that CLCC and DEEP have partnered to set up for you this summer. And we did that because the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program and Urban Green and Community Garden Grant Program applications are due in October 2nd. And we're also working on green plan revisions, which will start soon. So in light of those 2 big open space topics, we decided to just offer this opportunity for folks to come in and have these informal sessions and have an opportunity to ask questions. So I'm glad you're here. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Lindsay Soar, who is the the office director for the Land and Acquisition Management Office at DEEP. But we don't have a presentation today. There's plenty of presentations that we have recorded. The purpose of today is question and answer. So we'll open it up to you and hope that that will help guide our conversation today. So anybody want to kick off with their first question?
It can be very specific or broad. There are no bad questions.
Adam, I see Adam here. And if you can identify your organization, that would be helpful too.
Sure, I'm going to change my name. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for being here to answer some questions. Aspetuck Land Trust, Adam Goodman. I'm the land protection specialist, and I'm writing a couple OSWA grants. I just wanted to clear it up. Traditionally, what we've always done is gotten as many letters of support as possible. And I understand that's not needed. And I see over and over it says, please submit only 1 letter of support per organization. And I guess I just wanted to clarify, when I look at the scoring sheet, I see that municipal support letters are broken into, the governing legislative body is 1 bullet, the planning and zoning is another, and then inland wetland and conservation commissions are the other. When you say 1 organization, you mean that's 3 letters? Or is it just 1 letter for 1 municipality? And then the same thing for the state and regional support letters. It lists, the WestCog or MetroCog, the council of governments, and it also lists local land conservation org. I don't know if you just we need to pick 1 from each of the lists, or if we're looking at 5 letters here.
No, I think, maybe that's a holdover from some of our past, because we used to get all hard copy, right, before COVID. And so maybe we have to tweak the wording in the manual, in the application in the future. I think because it's all coming, PDF format or Word format, we can accept as many letters of support as you have. If it supports, certain resources within the scoring criteria, I think it makes sense. You can provide 1 for each of those entities.
Okay, so we should go. I just want to clarify because I'm
you
not
don't have you don't have to.
Okay.
And so it might just be a wording thing within the application is what I'm saying. Maybe 1 per each one that's listed makes sense. As many as you can get. We do have applications that have come in that have like 6, 7, 8, support letters. So we're not necessarily limiting it
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I understand you're not going to penalize us for doing too many. I just want to, because it says municipal support letters plural, and it says state and regional support letters plural, but then it says only 1 per organization. So when you say municipal, you were looking at it's 20 points. So just 1 letter from any municipal governing body, or you want the governing body, the planning and zoning, and open space commissions?
That's a good question. I think you can provide whatever you can get. So if there's going to be a separate support from inland wetlands versus planning, and you provide 2, that's okay. We're not gonna, like you said, we're not gonna penalize you. And I don't think it's going to increase your scoring necessarily if you have multiple ones, unless they're showing, different criteria that they're supporting. Does that make sense?
So go for as many as we can. And as long as it sounds like, as long as we have one municipal and one state and regional, it
Right.
sounds like maybe the full points would be available, but we'll
Right.
might as well
Exactly.
just go ahead and try to get what we can get. Okay. Thank you.
Exactly.
And Adam, just coming from from our perspective, a little bit more on the outside, I would say, to Lindsay's point, it's the quality of the letter too. If it's I've seen so many support letters where the land trust has written the letter and you get 5 of the same letter from various entities. But if you can have them tailor it, to Lindsay's point, to the criteria that is most relevant to their work, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't use a template when we're asking for letters of support, just because I know that it's hard to get them sometimes. But so traditionally we've sort of evolved into
Yeah, what I would recommend there is go ahead and use a template, because being on the receiving end of letters of support and being asked to write them, not for OSWA because we don't, but for other things all across the board, give them a template, but also give them some room to tailor it. Say, this is the part where you can write about, but just help them along by giving them that template.
And also being on writing letters of support prior in my past, job, also giving them bullet points on how they're relevant, if that makes sense. So if you're talking about planning and zoning, yes, maybe give them a template, but say, these are the points that the land trust sees are relevant for planning and zoning or for inland wetlands. So it's more work for you, I guess, but it might get you some additional support.
Okay, thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Deb Mosier had a question that she put in the chat. She said that she's got some construction activity going on outside, so she's not going to unmute herself here. But and the reason I'm jumping in here is because I think she's confusing OSWA with the CCPP program that CLCC is facilitating on behalf of the federal government. So Deb asks whether or not the easement grant has to be applied for by the landowner versus the land trust. And the answer to that is no. The land trust or the municipality is going to be applying to DEEP for the OSWA grant. And once that grant is approved, and Lizzie, please back me up on this and provide any further detail, but once that grant is approved, the easement would go from the land trust to DEEP. So the land trust would purchase the property using the funds and then grant an easement to DEEP. The Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program, the federal source of funding for match, that is set up differently so that it's actually the landowner that applies to the federal government for that funding. And then the easements are layered in that way, so that it's from the landowner to the federal government, and then the deed from the landowner into the land trust is subject to the federal easement, and then the state easement is from the land trust to the state.
So just to clarify, for Amy's program, the CCPP, the land trust will still do most of the work for the landowner, but the landowner would be the one to officially put the easement on prior to the land trust owning it. And then for DEEP, for our easement, typically you close, sometimes it's simultaneous, but typically you close on the property and then you put the conservation easement on it after you come back to us with the conservation easement.
Okay, they stopped for a second. My whole house is shaking. They're like drilling a hole right outside for a pole in my house. So I know I'm a neophyte, so I don't hope I'm not wasting people's time. But so the OSWA would be a purchase, and then the easement goes on, like you would, and so he's looking to still own the land, but just have the easement put on.
So that's another, so we don't do as many of those, but you can apply for OSWA for just a conservation easement. And then the way it works is we get like I won't go into detail, but we get like a half portion of that easement over it afterwards, for open space, purposes.
Okay. Yeah, he's totally willing to have it. He already has trails in it. No, it's such a beautiful place. It's got heron rookery and everything on it. And he wants to get it done, soon. And I don't know which one to go, whether I go CCPP or if I go OSWA for trying to get an easement on it.
You could do both.
You could do both.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you combine both, you could get 90% of, well, the purchase price of the easement, because it's not going to be the property, but
Right.
yeah.
Is there for an easement, he has his house on it, and he wants to carve out like 2 acres around his house. Is there any kind of restrictions or things on that? Like, does there have to be, obviously there has to be access to it, so he has his driveway in there, but does DEEP or the federal government require any kind of special things for the easement to be, acceptable to them?
In terms of OSWA, it will be cutting out the buildings, and then making sure that the appraisal takes that into account.
Okay.
So that's something you'll have to consider. And then same thing with like survey maps and stuff for the easement afterwards. It has to match what's.
All right. And so then, Amy, do you know anything about like the town of Waterford? Because somebody brought up the idea that it's RU 120, but does it need to have the same, if it has an easement on it that the public can use, does it still have to have the same amount of road frontage that would be needed for an RU 120 in the town? In other words, if we cut out his, just his access to the property, it's almost like a little balloon that goes in, it goes the driveway and then around his house. But that doesn't give him, 100 feet frontage for his house. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and that's a question to likely ask the town planner to make
Okay.
sure, because, under normal circumstances, if there wasn't a house and there wasn't that reduction in the frontage that you've just described, then you wouldn't have to go to the town planner for your OSWA project. So you're really not going to the town planner about the OSWA project, you're going to the town planner about this reduction, this change in frontage as it relates to the private property.
Okay.
And I would also say, talking to the town about if there's setbacks, if there's issues with septic or well, just talking through what that might look like with potential. It might not be an issue because it's an easement and not a fee purchase that we're, subdividing the land, but just have those conversations so they protect that private landowner, I guess.
Yeah. Like if his septic fails, can he put another one someplace else or something like that?
Yeah, making sure he has adequate space to maintain his facilities.
Right. You don't want to create a non-conforming use for him that will create problems down the road if he goes, well, even currently, but if he goes to sell the property.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but pertaining to that, isn't the easement you're going to exclude the buildings? Isn't that just filed with a Mylar basically with the easement? You're not actually subdividing the property.
Right. But
So
but with certain terms in the easements, it might limit what they can do in the future. So like I would say that a OSWA easement wouldn't allow a septic to be put on it, right? So they should think about potential issues that might come up in the future and maybe make the envelope a little bit bigger to ensure that they're protecting the private property owner.
okay.
But you're right, it's not a subdivision or even a first cut at that point. I mean, you're not changing the boundary lines of the property by putting an easement on it. But you also, because of the restrictions, you don't want to create any kind of non-conforming use on the portion that's been cut out, so to speak.
Yeah.
And does anybody know about fire access or anything like that? Like, does he have to have a turnaround if he's set off the road? Like, does he have to allow for the fire truck to get in there?
That's all like planning and zoning in the
Sound.
town, I would say. Yeah.
All right.
Great questions though, Deb.
Thanks.
I always say err on the side of caution. Make the cutout a little larger than maybe you were anticipating, just so he has what he needs.
And we're trying to stay within he had this done 15 years ago, but he had young girls growing up in the house and they didn't want public access, so they couldn't do a public grant to get the easement and everything. So we're trying to reuse some of the stuff that he did 15 years ago and, not spend a whole ton of money on surveys and stuff to do that. So, but I'll have to have the town check that out. We just happen to have a guy who's a firefighter volunteer on our board, and he brought up the fire thing, and I was like, oh, I never even thought of that, like, okay, cool. All right, I think that's it for me.
Thanks.
Adam, you're unmuted. Do you have another question?
I was gonna wait my turn
Anybody
if
else?
someone else has one.
You can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself and just ask your question. It's such a small group that we really do have the luxury of free
If there's
form
ever
here.
if there's a quiet time, feel free to come back to me. I have some questions, but obviously I want to let other people ask theirs.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'm brand new to the Avon Land Trust and really just beginning to learn. So it's good to listen in on future information that I'll need. You mentioned podcasts or PowerPoints or things earlier. Where do I find those?
We have for this particular series, we have them on our website bundled under the series. And yeah, would you mind placing that link in the chat for us? So we'll give you that link right now. But there's just a lot of information on CLCC's website, but also on DEEP's website. They have, and we'll put this in the chat as well. DEEP has the homepage for the Open Space Grant Program, and then a lot of links within that homepage to the application itself, to a really terrific frequently asked questions document, the scoring criteria used. So there's this right starting there is a great way to get that information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, Adam, we have a pause here. Have at it.
All right, great. So with relating to the difference, the correspondence between the CCPP and OSWA, I know OSWA is a reimbursement grant and it is paid out generally before you own, but it's irrelevant as long as you own after you apply for the grant. But the CCPP is you work with the landowner and the money comes in directly to the landowner at closing. So I just wanted to make sure I understand the timing. So if you're doing both, the OSWA grant will also follow suit with the federal grant in terms of timing to also be paid out at closing, or how does the timing of grant awards work?
Certainly the statutory amendment has impacted timing. So Lindsay, do you want to comment on that?
So what are you're thinking that you would close after the application deadline, but prior to announcing grants, or?
Well, actually, I'm doing both. I'm in one of the projects, we're acquiring it after we apply for the grant. But we're also applying for both grants. And then another one, we're only going to acquire it if we get the grant. And I'm just trying to figure out the timing for just with terms of landowner correspondence, letting them know. I understand. I know the federal grant works at a different pace than the state grant.
Yeah.
And so I'm just a little concerned about that timing of how that all comes down.
I'm not sure how it's going to align quite yet with the federal grant funding. But for ours, once the grant round closes, if you find out you're awarded a grant in, April, whenever we announce, you can come to us for the funding prior, as long as we've, awarded the grant, we'll work on a grant agreement. You can get the funding prior to closing. But if you've already closed, we could move through the steps relatively quickly and get you the money as well. So you could do it either way. I don't know how it's going to align with how the federal funding is going to come in yet, though, because we haven't closed on one yet. We're in process with a few. And potentially by the time, we announce grants in April, we will know, but that we don't know yet. how it will align with funding coming in from the federal government. So I don't know, Amy, if you have a sense for how that's going to work.
I'll defer to Yao, and then jump in as needed. But Yao, do you want to comment on that?
So yeah, our hope is to have both easements closed simultaneously, or to have the federal easement recorded first before the OSWA easements comes on top of it. You can have it such that OSWA is recorded first and the easement and the federal easement is recorded next. The feds won't allow that. But our hope right now is to have them aligned in such a way that they close at the same time. And that, getting back to something I believe someone mentioned, is sort of like the timeline. It may extend the timeline of your closing if you want to align everything at the same time.
But can you get funding? When can you get funding from the feds?
So
After
with the
they've
feds,
recorded?
so yes, if my understanding, so you can be reimbursed. This is not on the federal side, this is not a reimbursement grant program. So you can't close on a property and get reimbursed for whatever you spent on it. And so after they record, that's when the landowner, would get your money.
And I'll add to this, Adam, because as you know, we had to amend, have the legislature amend the OSWA statute this past session in order to make it clear on how the recordings would go, layering those easements. And so it of course clarified the fact that the federal easement goes first, but it also sets up a pretty tight timeline to make sure that you're meeting the statutory requirement. And so, you can't close on the federal grant until after you sign the grant agreement with DEEP, according to the terms of the statute. And so that really places both programs in a very tight timeline together. So it really, if it's not exactly simultaneous, for all intents and purposes, it serves that purpose.
So because of that, Amy, I guess because you can get funding prior to closing for us, if you sign the grant agreement, potentially you could align two amounts. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. We're all looking forward to closing on our first one to see
what the kinks
goes and what issues we have to address moving forward. It's always, the first one's always the hardest.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answered your question. I mean, for ours, it's as soon as the awards are announced, you could potentially move forward and get a grant agreement signed and get your funding to close. We just have to go through a few steps.
Right. So OSWA won't be held up by the federal grant, but the federal grant is held up by OSWA until we get the signed grant agreement, essentially is what it sounds like.
Yeah, we just have to align the timing.
Right. Okay.
Really is a good thing. It just, I think because it is a public-private partnership, it really, and the agencies are invested in this as much, in this program as much as we are, again, once these kinks start to be ironed out, I think it's going to run quite smoothly. And we hopefully will start to get on a faster pace of closing as a result. But that's all yet to be seen. Forever the optimist I am. Okay, what else? Any other questions out there? Oh, we've got one.
I have a question. I'm sort of thinking I'm hearing that there is now a public easement versus just private easements, which I'm familiar with. I mean, if you give an easement, is the public allowed on some of these easements now?
So for the OSWA grant program, that is a requirement of our grant program, is that you provide public access, some sort of public access, and you would put it in your application process. And then our easement has, stipulations in there that the property be open to the public.
At all times.
It doesn't have to be the entire property. So you could think through how some of that works depending on how you, if you put a trail through one section, then the other section maybe doesn't have to be, it has to have some sort of public access.
No, I meant, does it have to be open to the public all the time, or can it be like designated specific dates?
Typically it's all the time. It would be, yeah.
It's something different. Not familiar with this. Thank you.
Yep.
And Marcia, and Lindsay, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think if there are circumstances where there's maybe some endangered species that are more active during certain as breeding seasons, right? And or there's certain, and this is what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, there's
Lindsay, that if
exceptions.
there are exceptions that you can limit public access during certain times of year or on certain portions of the property, but generally it's public access.
Okay, thank you.
And this question came up in a meeting I was in last night about agriculture, and extensive agriculture on the entire site that is going to limit public access is probably this is probably not the right program for it.
And we do have kind of exceptions for some agricultural land, but it's at the discretion of the commissioner. And so typically we say public access is a criteria that we're
Okay.
sorry.
See, Brian's got a right. You're welcome, Marcia. Brian's got a question in the chat. This is a really good question as well. Any information on how we can apply for the quote special case and quote where we can apply for 100% of the value using OSWA plus presumably plus the federal source of funding? What types of projects would be considered for the 100% OSWA? Brian, when you say 100% OSWA is a matching grants program. So I think you mean combining the federal and the state so that you can get 100% as opposed to being limited to 90%?
I can try to find the document that I had seen that. I think it was the 2023 OSWA FAQ.
There's an exception within the statute that the commissioner can have discretion to allow for 100%. I would say I don't know that we've had an instance where we've done it. It would be a very special property. I think it would be a very special case where it was a group that didn't have the capacity to provide matching funds. It would have to be a very special case.
Well, I have to confess, I didn't know that option was there.
Yeah, there's I'd have to go back.
The last page of the FAQs.
No.
Yeah, I just put that in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking into a project that would be a significant marsh with probable wood turtles in the uplands, as well as being an imperiled river system. So I feel like it's like, what else would we need to check a box to be a super special place,
Well, it's not just, I don't think it's just about special place, right? I think it's about very special place, and the group that's applying doesn't have capacity, right? So we have it as a matching grant program because we want buy-in from the communities, from the entities, from private individuals. And so even if it's like the last remaining something, I think it still has to have some explanation and extensive explanation on, why even 5% of matching can't be provided, or, something like that, to understand why the community can't provide some sort of match funding.
I would also imagine the distressed municipalities would also almost be a requirement for that, considering that
I think that would be a key thing for sure. And a community that we don't typically work in, a community there hasn't been a ton of funding for, that has a very low percentage of open space. All those types of things I think would come into account when we were explaining it to the commissioner on why, the support would be there for 100%. But you can do 90% for either distressed or non-distressed if you're using federal funding. So if you consider federal funding and state funding opportunities and you combine them, you could get up to 90%, which is usually pretty good.
The link, we'll put in an updated link for the statute as it was just amended in 2023. So. Go ahead, Deb.
When you say open to the public, so the piece that we're thinking about, is on a rural road. It's possible that we would be able to put a parking lot in, but do you require a parking lot for people to be able to access it?
Typically what we're saying is, even if it's a 2-car pull-off, something like that, just to provide some way for people to safely access the public trail or the fishing area or whatever is going to be provided as public access.
Okay. All right. And does that have to be outlined in the grant application?
Yeah, typically we want to see, because that'll come into the scoring criteria when we look at the rubric, and you're providing public access, you have a parking area, you know, somewhere for people to safely access it.
So whoa, that's my dog. Emerald. So we have a place where it could possibly be, but it wouldn't be ready by the time the grant, you know what I mean? It's like, so that would be like, you could put the plan for it in there, or.
Right. That's
Okay.
typically, especially if you're working with a private landowner for a conservation easement, I would say have your plan, talk to them about it. If things get tweaked after, once you acquire it and you're developing that, you know, we can talk about it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we have an idea where it could be, because there's a field there, but there's a stone wall in the way, and you know, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Other questions, comments, complaints?
I have a question. Brian put something in about when we applied before, we had a 6-car parking lot, but we don't have an easement. I was questioning the public easement. Do you have to have an official public easement? I mean, it's town owned. We want it to be for the public.
When you applied for our open space grant program,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
so I would say there is potential for like much older grants to have not required parking, but it got up, you know, we kind of updated our policies.
We're talking about having the parking. That's a definite, because we're on kind of a big.
Oh, you're talking
curve
about the conservation
I'm
easement.
talking about whether I know the conservation easement word in relationship to private people. We have one on our land, but I don't know this public conservation easement. How is that done? I mean, it's owned by the town, so the town kind of.
Well, so it would be owned by
ownership.
the town, but the state would hold the easement to ensure that, especially on a town property, potential for change in use, right? And we're trying to prevent that because you're using state funding for acquisition for open space. So the easement is to ensure that public access remains into the future.
Okay, so that easement comes with the grant, or do you have to have an easement before?
No, it's an easement that you work on with the state of Connecticut, and we can send you a template if you would be interested in seeing it.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about the appraisal?
Yep.
So it over and over, it says if you're applying for a federal grant, you need to do both fee simple value, and also easement value. And I guess the concern is with the CCPP program, they're going to be doing their own appraisal. And we can't have own appraisal for easement value, because it's based on the easement value. It's what CCPP award is. Yeah.
We just started having that conversation with people because this came up. And I think maybe Amy had a conversation, or Yao had a conversation with someone. So since the feds will pay for, you could apply for OSWA without the easement value, but then because we can only go up to 90%, we need to see that easement value before we provide funding, because we have to make sure that we meet the 90%. So if you're gonna then provide that easement appraisal later to us before we close on sending you funding, that's okay. But we will need to see both values so that we can, you know, if CCPP is going to be a certain amount and with OSWA funds, it would take you over 90%. We need to then reduce the OSWA amount. So we have to see both values at some point.
I totally get, but I don't know that the federal appraisal will list the state as a user. And I know you indicate, or the grant application indicates we need to put, I guess the federal government as a user for the OSWA appraisal.
So that was the question that was going back and forth. And I don't know if it's worthwhile for you to ask that question, whether we can be a user, or if then your original appraisal can be, you might use the same appraiser, can be altered to show that easement value afterwards. We have to figure out those logistics. Okay. But I don't think when you apply to OSWA, you have to necessarily show it. It's just we need it to know what we can, how we fund to 90% is the basis of it.
And obviously the OSWA award won't, I understand you got to be below 90%. I understand OSWA will be reduced based on what the federal grant offers so that you don't exceed 90%. But we will still, the OSWA grant won't be reduced until you know for sure that we're accepting the federal grant also.
So you would get you would basically get an award letter for the amount that you were qualified for. So if you're qualified for 65% and this year we have enough funding to give you 65%, you will get an award letter that shows that. It'll just be when we work out the numbers that it will end up getting reduced if there's an issue with the 90%.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We are hosting a dedicated session to the Urban Green and Community Garden program next Thursday, which will be our last lunch and learn session for the summer. But, you know, obviously feel free to ask what you want today since you have us here, and maybe you won't be available next week.
If nobody else has, I know between Adam and I, we're like taking
I
up
have
the
more.
time.
You're probably helping other people, so don't.
Okay. As a neophyte to grants, do we do the survey first, then the appraisal? Or do we start the grant application and then do the, what's the order?
You do not have to have the survey to apply for OSWA.
Okay.
You do need an appraisal.
Okay.
The deadline for appraisal information is later, so you can provide the appraisal and appraisal review November 2nd. It's a little lot later. You do have to have all your application materials in by October 2nd, but the appraisal stuff can come later. But you don't have to do a survey until we're getting ready to close, until we've done some steps prior.
But how can they do the appraisal without having the survey?
They could do it based on, so typically they could do it based on a map, like, you know, a map you make. Yep. And then when we do the survey, if there's changes in acreage, usually they do per acreage. Yep. So the amount can change slightly. If it's a really large, so say you put in an application for like 300 acres and it ends up being only 100 acres after the survey is done, which is unlikely. But if it's over a certain percentage difference, then we'd have you update the appraisal.
Okay. Cool.
And there's, you know, there are maps, generally speaking, there's going to be a map on record for these properties. It's just may not be to the A2 level, the A2 standard. So there could be a compilation plan there, Class D, whatever, but so there's that information is generally available to the appraiser.
How much do appraisals run usually?
Ooh, it depends where you are, how much property, what type of property. It depends on a lot of things.
So I think it's like a really great appraiser down there and Steve Flanagan. So just get him early.
Yeah.
You have resources, Amy, right? If people were looking.
Yes, if you're looking for appraisers, and Steve Flanagan is one of them on our list as well. We keep a list of appraisers that have experience with the OSWA grant program and are happy to share the names and contact information, excuse me. Gosh, I was going to say something.
I can shed some light on the cost, Deb. I think it's around 3,000-ish
Oh, I know, that's what I said.
dollars. And then I think the appraisal review is about half that.
It,
Okay,
It might be
that's for the-
3,500 or something like
that
that.
was for the appraisal, right? Adam,
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
and then-
For a survey, the survey obviously is going to range depending upon the size of the property. But we do have a transaction assistance grant program, the TAG program at CLCC that Yao administers, and he can provide you with lots of information. We'll be opening up that grant round again in November. So we'll put the link to that, but that can provide land trusts with funding to help offset the costs of a survey.
Or an appraisal, yeah.
Or an
I would say
appraisal.
too that Adam's working in Fairfield County. And if you're in southeastern Connecticut, it might be slightly different. Just
Oh, yes, true. We're expensive here.
so you could call and get some cost estimates though from. I think Brian had a CCPP question in the chat, Amy.
Oh, yep. Sorry, Brian. Do you want to just say it out loud, Brian? You want to unmute? Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
So it's really helpful to have like model documents for things. So like, is there a model purchase and sale agreement for like these more complicated CCPP transactions, because there is this like set timeline and everything, or like any communications outlining this process to landowners? So every land trust can kind of all be on the same page about how we're talking to landowners about these things.
So that is been difficult to answer because each project will be slightly different and it will have its own set of issues. But in terms of a purchase and sale agreement, usually NRCS sends that purchase and sale agreement once they know for sure that they want to fund a specific property. But there are model documents as to what the easement templates will look like. So there are different levels of restrictions for the easements. And so those, the link I put in the chat will allow you to go through those different easements and their restrictions and what they entail. But in terms of the process, we can set up a call. What I've been doing is set up a call with the land trust and potentially the landowner just to outline what they can expect out of this process and how long it's going to take.
And then Brian, in your agreement with the landowner, you can have a contingency clause that specifically references the different, most land trusts are going to have a financing contingency clause in their contract anyway. And if you wanted to get more specific and reference CCPP as part of your contract, you can do that. But it wouldn't. There's no model purchase and sale agreement between the land trust and the landowner for CCPP because it really is an agreement between the landowner and the federal government.
Does the state want to see it sounds like they want to see every agreement that is associated with the acquisition. What I mean by that is beyond the purchase and sale agreement or a letter of intent, if there's some like if we're partnering with the town to purchase a property or to apply for the grant, we're going to have a memorandum of understanding with the town. That's something that the state wants to see. And I guess I'm just looking at this one supporting material thing that says checkbox. It says show commitment, amount, and sources related to creative/alternative funding proposals. So
Yeah,
I guess I'm wondering.
So if you have an MOU with the town or another organization that's going to provide funding, should it go through, I think it would score higher if you already have funding sources secured, if that makes sense. The more funding you have secured, knowing the match is going to be there and we can move the project forward, I think it will score higher on the rubric.
Okay. My question, I guess I want to know also, and this pertains to a purchase and sale agreement. If the purchase and sale agreement, if you have some arrangement that essentially that uses a percentage of how much grant money we get and to determine how much they kick in, I'm just wondering if you are seeing that agreement, if that affects your decision on awards. In other words, if you know,
they
for
would
example,
do a bargain sale if you got enough.
No, not with the landowner. I guess for the matching amount, like if we're looking to getting help with a source of funding to have the town match through bonding or whatever, but that bonding is related to how much funding we get. And I guess what I'm wanting to know is if you see, you're going to know that relationship and you're going to know what sort of deal we have in place. And if that deal involves, they pay more if we get less grant money, or they pay less if we get more grant funding. I just want to make sure that agreement won't impact the decisions that you guys make.
So typically the way yours is set up, the way we do the scoring rubric, I don't think it would come into play, but if you're worried about confidentiality, then, certainly keep it back just in case. But, we're looking at the certain criteria for each pool of scoring. And I don't think that would come into play. I think the fact that you have some matching funds is kind of like a check mark, but it's not, we're not going to change what we're offering you because, you could potentially we're basing it on the fair market value or the purchase price of the property. And if we have enough funding, we're going to offer you 65% or 75%, depending on, and we're not going to, if we reduce, we're not going to look at yours and be like, well, they could get funding somewhere else. It's going to be a blanket reduction, across the board that makes sense and is, fair to people.
Just because the town was concerned, like, well, why are we going to tell them how much funding it'll take to get, understandably.
Yeah.
But I want to also be upfront and clear about where we are. I don't want any skeletons in our closet. So I want to show everything that we need to. So yeah. I guess you said if we're worried about confidentiality, we can hold it back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worried, the way you could do it more would maybe be a letter saying that the town is committing to match funding. You don't even have to necessarily put an amount, but just so we understand that there's some match funding available. I don't think it would come into play because that's not how we review and, score.
And I think by analogy, it's like you're not going to penalize a land trust in terms of the percentage awarded under OSWA because they're applying for a federal grant.
Right.
It's all gets factored in at the end, in terms of meeting that 90%. And then what you're talking about refers to any amount above the 90% that would need to be matched. And so DEEP doesn't, right, Lindsay, you're not going to consider that in terms of making your award. Just knowing, though, that you have a commitment from the town is a really good thing. Yeah.
And I do think my goal is if we have funding, we're going to give the amounts that are listed in statute, the highest amount that's listed in statute for people. And it would only be if it gets reduced that you would even worry about that. But the way we do reductions typically is like a percentage base, or like the top 5, get fully funded. And then there's a reduction to the ones below. So that's not how we would factor funding.
Good to hear you say that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We're at 1:05. We've got about 10 minutes left, but I'm sure everyone would love an extra 10 minutes at lunchtime. So don't feel like you have to ask any questions, but we're here if you have them. Anybody else going once?
I have one minor question that's easy for you to answer. It has to do with the public access, about how you publicize your property. And in the application, you say Connecticut Trail Finder is one of the appropriate methods, as well as just our website. And I guess I'm wondering, it looks like Connecticut Trail Finder, I don't think we've put any of our trails or properties in there. Is that a database that state is trying to build up, or can we literally just have our Aspetuck Land Trust website with the information there? These are more points awarded for both.
You don't have to have Connecticut Trail Finder. I think it's providing a resource of another opportunity. That is kind of a new thing that they're trying to build out, and add all these opportunities to it. But in your application, it can be your website as well. And that can be the average.
And also don't confuse public access with promotion of the property. I mean, public access is a different component. of the
So
requirements.
all the promotion that you do, if you did reach out to Connecticut Trail Finder and want to get all your properties up there, you know, we would want to know that. That would be nice to know for the application materials, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, it doesn't change the, yeah, I meant public access compliance is what I was referring to, Amy.
Yeah. So for compliance purposes, it should be somewhere that we can
Okay.
access and see and know that it's out there for the public to consume.
Okay.
Jeffrey, yes, we do have a contact for Trap Rock Ridgeland Conservancy. And if you, we should have your email, but why don't you email me and then I will send you that contact. I'm putting my email in here. Let's see, was there anything else? I think the questions were excellent. Thank you so much for coming today and asking them so that we could all learn from the answers.
Yeah.
Looked in here.
In,
I don't.
in terms of a layered easement, Lindsay, I understand federal go first, then state. If there's a third easement that's being put on the property, you just don't want to know about it, or as long as it's after the state easement does it, it's fine.
So we would want to see it because we would want to make sure it's compatible with the terms within our easement.
Okay.
And I would preface that by saying, make sure it doesn't go on the land records prior to.
No.
I've
I've learned my lesson.
Yeah, we can't have any prior protections for the property for open space if we're going to provide funding. So.
I understand.
But yeah, we've had an instance where Land Trust in Western Connecticut has an OSWA easement, and then they're working on like a Forever Wild easement on top of it. And we just have to ensure that the Forever Wild easement has stipulations that still allow for public access or anything else within our easement that we want to make sure remains. So.
Okay.
Anything else? Deb, were you going to say something?
Yeah, there was two things in the chat. Somebody's asking of contact for Trap Rock Land
Yep.
Trust.
Yeah. So I just put my email in there so Jeffrey can contact me and I'll get him the email for the president of the land trust, who's Amanda Thompson. I just didn't want to go out of the room and miss something when I was searching for it. So Jeffrey, I'm happy to get that to you. Oh, what was the name of that Trap Rock Land Trust? Oh, so Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy actually was recently created through the merger of 3 land trusts in the Hartford region, East Granby, Wintonbury, and West Hartford. So it's a new regional land trust created from the merger of those 3 single town land trusts.
Thank you. I sent you an email.
Thank you. Yep. Very exciting too.
Yeah, we met with Simsbury and they suggested we sit down with them. We've been spending a lot of time with Simsbury lately.
Good. Great. Another great land trust. Be wonderful to partner with.
So I just have to say I'm in Canton and I'm with the Canton Land Trust, and we're very concerned about the Trap Rock Ridge that's between Canton, that intersects Canton, Simsbury, and Avon. So that's when I was asking about this Trap Rock, because that's just the name of their land trust. There's no special organization that protects Trap Rocks or funding for Trap Rocks.
There, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but there's definitely protections for, as you know, the regulations and all, but it often comes down to a lot of municipal advocacy, but the land trusts are often involved with that local advocacy to protect the Trap Rock Ridge corridor there. And yeah, no, I know well about the Canton issues and Simsbury for that matter, between the 2 towns. But yeah, so, oh, Teresa, okay, yeah. And I can give you I'll CC you on that as well, so you can contact that land trust if you want to learn more about what they're doing. I'm sure they'd be great partners for Canton.
Well, we're partners with the Simsbury Land Trust a lot. So this but thank you. That might be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. All right.
Teresa, have you been talking to Rick Dubiel with Avon?
No, but I'm not the president of the
Okay.
Canton Land Trust. I'm assuming our president has been.
Okay.
I'm just a person who helps with the grants.
Want to help us too?
Well, if we ever have any land that intersects, sure. That the more land we can protect in a big, but a big area, the better, right?
Watch for
Contingent land.
Terry and Jeff. I'm going to have Aaron Lefland, our deputy director, reach out to you because this is one of the responsibilities that he has is getting out there and bringing land trusts together to have these conversations. So I'm sure he'd be happy to set something up in the region, especially with Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy being new as a regional organization. All right, but it's 1:13 and yeah, I think we'll leave it like that. Brian, thank you for that comment. I think that's why land trusts look to merge, is to share resources. It's definitely one of the reasons that they do. But thank you all so much. And if there's no objection here, and if there is, just email me. We will make this recording available to folks that missed today and might be interested in the questions that you all asked. But feel free to email me if you have any concerns about that based upon the questions you asked and the answers you received. All right. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much for coming. And again, next Thursday is our last session, and it's on the Urban Green and Community Garden program. All right.
Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care. Bye.
Thank you.